There we go. All right. So I wanted to extend a welcome to AC, who's joining me for this episode of Bookwarm Games on Xenogears for my first conversation episode. So AC, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Hey, and thank you for your time. I found out about your work sort of searching around for research materials on Xenogears, which one of the first things that I came across, I think, is your study guide page.
Mm.
And I have found it really helpful, really interesting. I haven't read everything on there, that is. I've tried to read all the Xenogears material, but I haven't got into all the Xenosaga stuff yet. But I'm just kind of in awe of how much information you've brought together on there. So thank you very much for all your work on that.
Yeah,
Um,
I did have a lot of help,
oh, for sure.
with translators and other people who discovered, old interviews and things that I had no idea existed. So,
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing project. I would love to hear a little bit about how you got interested in Xenogears, the game, and then how you got going on this study guide project. What you kind of um, first might have like what first interested you, what first made you want to do it, and kind of where it went from there.
well, okay, so I began playing Xenogears in the beginning of 1999. It was actually it was a demo that came with Parasite Eve.
Oh yeah.
So I played that game at the end of 1998, and then I was actually waiting for Final Fantasy VIII. I had just gotten into Square RPGs with Final Fantasy VII. There was this phenomenon back then. Everyone was playing Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even people who had not been into these Japanese RPGs before. So I came on board with that whole
Hmm. Well, that
wave.
yeah, that is sort of a different generation from me. I like started playing video games as a little kid with Final Fantasy. It was called Final Fantasy 2, but it was really Final Fantasy 4, I think, in Japan, and Final Fantasy 3, which was really 6. So
Yeah,
I was like, that for me is like what I think of with Final Fantasy. And 7 I loved, but everything after that I kind of fallen off. I definitely
yeah.
um,
I didn't get further than Final Fantasy VIII
yeah.
actually.
Yeah,
But
well, so
I'm in Europe and we didn't have those Final Fantasy games.
oh man,
We had none of that. I think Final Fantasy VII was the first one to be released in PAL regions.
gotcha. Yeah, well, I know you're aware of this, right? Xenogears was originally planned as a Final Fantasy title, and then uh,
Yeah.
they ended up making it its own separate well series and now a separate company as a result. But so yeah, so how did you get into Xenogears once the demo finished? Like, how far did the demo go,
Well,
and then what'd you go from there?
I needed something to sort of tie me over until Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah.
So, but actually, Xenogears kind of grabbed my interest more
Mm.
once I actually got through the game. It had a it yeah, I didn't know what I was getting into. I just I like the music was the first thing that stood out in the demo.
Uh,
So I thought, I think I actually bought the soundtrack along with the game because the
yeah.
game had to be imported from the States. And that shop, online shop, I think it also had imports of video game soundtracks. So I think I ordered the soundtracks for Xenogears also. I had read a little bit about it, and so I knew that it had some religious themes,
Yeah.
which I thought sounded interesting. But I didn't really, I didn't think that much of it. I just thought it might be, another fun Square game because Parasite Eve had also turned out to be a pretty good game. So I figured, this company, I'm sure they probably can do nothing wrong.
Yeah, I've never played Parasite Eve, but I mean, just in the title itself, you've got that idea of, well, Adam and Eve sort of built in. It seems like there's a theme going on here. Uh,
Yeah, well, Parasite Eve is based on this on mitochondrial Eve, which is a scientific term for the origin of our mitochondrial DNA.
oh,
So that's where that comes from, and of course this concept comes from the Bible, of course, with Eve.
yeah, yeah. Also, again, like I'm curious about the demo version that you played. Did it include that whole opening, cinematic?
Yeah, it did. It did, but
Okay.
I think that it was cut slightly. I'm not sure, but I think there was some small part missing.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. But the things that was the main difference between the demo and the game was that you could play as Ellie and Bart on the way to Seaton's house,
Oh, wow. That's so
and
strange.
and so they had this sort of new dialogue exclusive to the demo, where they sort of poked fun at, well, you're not supposed to show up this early, and they say, well, calm down, it's just a demo or something like that. I don't remember exactly. And they had all their death blows unlocked.
Oh, wow.
And so that was also one of the reasons I felt like that I became interested in the game, because I thought, well, these are pretty cool. And I
Absolutely.
didn't and I didn't know that once I actually got the game, I had to unlock them across the set. And I was a bit intimidated by the robots or the
Okay.
gears. It looked kind of complicated, and I thought, oh, wow, we're gonna pilot these machines. I thought it was going to be very difficult, but it turned out to be pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. The gears, they're such a strange component of the game, and I guess that's sort of implied in the title itself, right? The Xenogears, like the foreign, the strange gears, they sort of interrupt what looks like a more traditional kind of story and fly in, and then the rest of the game is a process of sort of understanding what this thing is that, that has ruined your
Yeah,
life.
I remember one impression that I got from the game, at least in the early parts, was that it didn't feel um, Japanese in the same way that
Yeah.
Final Fantasy VII did, for example. I remember looking at, for example, this character, the designs of the text, the dialogue,
Yeah.
these images of the characters. And I remember that Citan, he
Yeah.
looked sort of like he looked almost Western in the sort of in the whole concept. It felt like it resembled sort of movies or stories
Yeah.
that just gave me sort of a Western impression, except with the gears. They felt, they were like these Japanese mechs that sort of
Absolutely.
made the whole thing feel a little bit like a unique blend in some way. At least I had never really encountered anything that really had the same feel, the same.
Yeah. Well, I mean that seems to be the case with the music too. Like you mentioned, it's very striking. It's very different from Final Fantasy music or most other video game music. It has a kind of a Celtic element to it
Yeah, yeah,
that
exactly.
is very distinctive. It's a weird and unique blend. I think that's a good way to describe a lot
Yeah,
of
and all
things.
the religious concepts are also
Yeah.
very sort of Western influenced.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, there's not Buddhism in this game exactly. even though they have reincarnation and that stuff. But the reincarnation seems to be more inspired by esoteric Christianity and Gnosticism and that sort of stuff more than Buddhism, for example.
Right. Yeah. Well, so how did you get like into the whole study of the game? Like where did that begin? Was it with the religious element and some of that stuff, or?
No, it had to do with it was after Xenosaga.
Oh, okay.
There had been I don't know. I guess it had to do with the age of the game Xenogears too. But there was all these websites disappearing, and there was especially one big one that was called Xenosaga.com, which was sort of the hardcore fan base that had been building up since Xenogears. And the webmaster of that site got really disillusioned after Xenosaga Episode 2, which was sort of a disappointment to many people because it was much shorter and had completely changed the design and a lot of other stuff. So, Xenosaga had, started to build its own separate fan base. But this old fan base was more knowledgeable, and it had, collected more interviews and had been there since before the start. And, it's unavoidable that you have much more knowledgeable people in those kind of communities.
Yeah.
Than you have by those who became fans of Xenosaga after the game was released.
Yeah, well, like I think I never played Xenosaga 2. I only played the first episode of Xenosaga, and it was already so different from Xenogears that I kind of lost interest in any
there was
later
that
games.
too. There was that too. There were a lot of Xenogears fans who didn't get into Xenosaga at all, and I actually it was a slow start for me as well.
Yeah.
And I actually, I was kind of. I did not quite enjoy Xenosaga as much as Xenogears, but I think after episode 3, which was actually pretty good, and was the most, I think it was the most similar to Xenogears in some ways. It sort of changed my perception on both Xenosaga and Xenogears.
Oh, wow.
But it's a very complicated story.
Well, we don't have to go all the way into that exactly, but so this was when you sort of felt like it was up to you to create a website that would sort of
I was
maintain
discussing
stuff.
with people on the internet, on forums, and I noticed that I often had to. I quoted a lot of interviews that I still had saved on my hard drive.
Okay.
And that was okay, if someone had questions or I was, one of the experts that had a lot of knowledge about the series, not just about the game itself, but about developer quotes and things like that. But there was some interviews that even I had not been able to save because I didn't know that a lot of this stuff was going to disappear. Sure. With the internet, you might assume that everything is forever on the internet, but my experience was that actually nothing is not at all right. Forever on the internet. Things can disappear. When sites disappear, when hosting sites disappear and take all this information and other websites with them, there's not a lot left. And there were some interviews, especially all the interviews that mentioned that outright explicitly mentioned that Xenogears was at one point intended to be part of the Chrono Trigger series.
Yeah.
Had been lost. And so, I encountered people on these forums who didn't believe that anymore. And they said, that's just a rumor. And, where is this evidence? And, I had seen the interviews, but, I could not, prove it.
Sure.
But of course, now I have been able to resurrect some of those interviews. perhaps not exactly those interviews, but at least a few new ones that some friends of mine found on Japanese sites. There was stuff that had that still remained on Japanese site, but we didn't have a translator for a very long time. That was kind of difficult to find, and we also didn't have the complete translation of this source book, the Xenogears Perfect Works.
Right.
You're familiar with that book?
I have looked at it a little bit. I have not read the scanlation, the full thing that I've seen up. I don't know how reliable it is either, but I'm interested in it. I mean, yeah. I don't know enough about Japanese language and culture in general, I feel like. So I definitely sympathize with what you're saying. But it is, it's helpful that at least a good deal of this information is preserved through your website and through the people that you know from those days of the Xenosaga fan site.
Yeah.
It's really helpful.
It was around the beginning of 2009.
Okay.
And the first version went up in 2010. And then back then it was an actual site, and I had never done a site before. I mean, I had tried a long time ago, but I was not really a web designer.
Sure.
So I took the most simplest template I could find. And I had a host with some of these people who had a forum that was sort of the leftovers, those who had migrated and gathered at the new place after the old big website and community disappeared.
Yeah.
So I hang around with those guys for a while, and but then that host disappeared as well, and so the first version of the study guide went down. And then I resurrected it on this blog because it seemed I wanted to have more control. I didn't want to rely on a host.
Sure.
Because whenever there was some problems, I had to wait for those people to assist.
Right. Yeah, I think Blogspot, it's part of Google, so it seems like pretty safe, at least from what I can tell. It's the same thing that I use for my blog. It's really easy. It's really stable, or so it seems. Well, we'll see, I guess.
Yeah, it works for me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so I think I wanted to ask you a little bit about the discussion that you have on there. That's aside from the homepage, the first thing that you see is the merits of these works. That seems like a really interesting argument that you make there. If you could just kind of like tell us a little bit about what you see as the merit of Xenogears, like what makes it worth spending this much time, this much effort to preserve and study.
Well, that's the question that I sort of pose and try to analyze in that article, and I'm not sure how successful I've been. But basically, it's there's a lot of themes in the story that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Right.
And there's also this. There's often a comparison with other RPGs. There's. I felt that there was something very different with Xenogears and also Xenosaga. Yeah. And I sort of felt that I wanted to define, what is it that makes these games so special, and why do I like them so much more than other games or other stories, and I'm not sure I can recall at the moment everything that I attempted to cover in that article.
That's okay. I mean, it's a long article. It's very worth checking out. I would definitely commend it to people. Recommend it to people to check out. I mean,
it's been a while since I thought about Xenogears. I should say that. I should mention that. So I'm a bit rusty at the moment.
That's okay. Well, I mean, part of it, like you mentioned, there's this feel or this mood that the game creates, which is somehow different from what you might expect or might get with a lot of other games that it gets compared to for more superficial similarities. I mean, I think that a big part of that is the music, right? Is the art style, but part of it too, yeah, is the story. Like the themes of the story are pretty substantial. They're obviously overlaid by some more you know cliche elements. Let's say like the mechs. You know, that's something that you get in plenty of pop culture, but at the same time, that it's a really interesting way of sort of telling these mythological and even religious these older stories, you know, in this kind of new format. I find it, you know, I'm with you. Like I find it very interesting, very profound, difficult maybe to fully explain, but part of that I think comes through just with the attack on the ship, like that we see, like before anything else really happens in the game, we see this very intense, you know, cinema sequence where the ship itself seems to be like destroying itself and quoting passages of the Bible at us in
Yeah.
in its you
Yeah,
know
I
destruction.
mean, the opening cinematic is sort of this uh, allusion to the Garden of Eden.
Yes,
It
yeah,
becomes this myth of paradise in the actual game later.
right. Right. The ship itself gets converted into one of the later dungeons. Is that right? Am I remembering that
Yeah,
correctly?
exactly. And
Yeah.
it's called Machanon or Machanon. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's basically it's the fourth heaven
Uh-huh.
in one of these biblical. Well, I think it is one of those Enoch,
Yeah. So
those
Gnostic tradition.
not official biblical stories, but one of these. What's it called?
Uh, like
Apocrypha or whatever.
yes,
I don't know. Yeah.
yes. Apocryphal.
Apocryphal texts.
Yeah. So
And
it's
basically, the Garden of Eden was said to be housed within the fourth heaven of Machanon or something like that. So there's that link there. And there's also these kind of these cables that come out of the hull of the ship.
yes.
I think that's supposed to be, serpent imagery.
Ah.
I'm not sure, but that's it could be taken as that.
I didn't think of that. I like that a lot, though. They sort of like slither almost like a snake. Yeah, yeah. Now that you
Yeah,
say that, I can totally see that. Yeah. And the monster, you know, this machine thing that's attacking is called Deus, right? The
yeah.
Latin name of
And
God.
originally it was supposed to be called Yahweh.
Oh my gosh, Yahweh was the original name.
And the strange thing is that the symbolism have all this kind of blend. It's like a blend of Yahweh
Hmm.
and of Eve with Miang,
Yes.
and then these serpents is Satan imagery. And I
Yeah.
think this is supposed to be a reference to Gnostic Christianity with the demiurge.
Right.
So you have this symbolism in Gnosticism with a kind of I think it is a lion with the tail of a snake,
Hmm.
and that symbolizes the demiurge. And we know that Miang has this snake gear
Yeah.
late in the game, Opiomorphos, or what it's
Right.
called. And also in the last boss, is it okay with spoilers?
Yes, of course. I
Yeah.
think anyone still listening hopefully has played this game. Yeah, watch out because we're gonna tell you everything that we know or think about the game. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, spoilers are fine.
And then there's Ellie, which is sort of the main body of Deus.
Yeah.
They mention this in the game, although perhaps it is better to say that she is the main body of Miang, or this. I guess we could call it the consciousness of Deus. She is sort of the control program. This source book, Perfect Works, mentions that once Deus has been resurrected, Miang pilots the resurrected Deus. And also she originates from this kind of program. I think it was called Alpha 1. And then you have Omega, which is this kind of creature-like body. You also see that in the opening movie. There's this kind of creature with a tail and kind of wings on its back.
Yeah. Yeah, it sort of flashes on the screen briefly.
Yeah, I mean this whole concept of Deus is kind of both complicated and mysterious, because there's a lot of questions. There's not a lot of answers in the game as to what this thing is, or how it was created, and even why it was created. I mean, it was created for some kind of war, and the book Perfect Works just adds to the mysteries.
Yeah, well, it strikes me that the creators of the game seem to have had a really ambitious story in mind when they started to work. Maybe so much so that it was impossible to actually, complete or completely put this story into a single video game, or even a whole series of video games, right? Like there's something that always seems to escape from our ability to pin it down, and it seems like that's part of what they are doing by calling this creature Yahweh or Deus. It's something that's so big that it's completely
Yeah, I
ineffable.
mean
Right?
they were going for God. I mean, they were really going for a real sort of godlike being.
Yeah.
We have this second kind of God, which is the wave existence,
Yes, at the very
which is
end, right? Yeah.
you could argue that that is the real God of this universe, but it doesn't actually belong to our universe. It comes from a higher dimension.
Right.
But there is. Well, this is if one has played the Xenosaga games, they introduce more of these kind of supernatural forces,
Huh.
and I think that Xenogears, if you look closely, also has a lot of these kind of real religious concepts, and even these occult
Mhm.
concepts. There is this key, the Goetia key. I'm not sure how you pronounce all these words.
I don't know.
There's this key that they use in the second plot point in the game,
Right.
when the humanity transforms, when they mutate into parts for Deus. There's this
Yeah.
big twist
Right.
right before the end, and this key, when it goes into operation, you see all these kind of occult circle-like symbols.
Interesting.
And how does this thing really work? Are these some kind of frequencies like magic that sort of goes through the ether, and it causes humanity to transform? I mean, it is almost like magic.
Yeah. And this is something we see, very early on. Like characters have these occult sort of abilities, right? Like it's called
Yeah,
different things for different
the
characters.
chi.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but a lot of this is sort of explained with this kind of super engine, the Sohar. which
Uh-huh.
sort of uses the energy from the higher dimension, which kind of gives it infinite power.
Right.
And this power, I guess, when human beings they evolve and develop these abilities, it's a bit like in this novel that inspired Xenogears, Childhood's End. You
Right.
have children developing some ability there. I can't remember exactly what it was at the moment. I don't know if it was telepathy or something
Yeah,
like
well,
that.
they seem to be hearing voices. They seem to have the ability to move things with their mind, right? The baby like playing with her toy without actually touching it, right? Stuff like this.
Yeah, I don't remember the book. It was a while since I read Childhood's End. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that was inspired by that concept exactly. But it's sort of similar. They evolve and develop new abilities.
Right.
But still there is some kind of supernatural element involved still. For example, the Emperor Cain,
Yes.
who is immortal in the game. Well, actually, towards the end, he has sort of lost his ability to live forever because there was some kind of experiment. He offered his body to Krelian for to be able to use the immortality of his body to help human beings or something like that. This was
Okay.
mentioned in the book. I'm not sure if it's stated in the game,
Okay.
but originally he was immortal, and even in the game they need Ramses to assassinate him in order to get rid of him, because nobody can get rid of Cain except for a clone of Cain,
Aha.
and that was Ramses. And but of course that begs the question: why? How can a being that is the result of this kind of intergalactic weapon become immortal?
Right.
What is this substance that people are built out of? You know, that came from this weapon. Why would they have this kind of organic element within this? I mean, those who created the system. So there's a lot of this kind of unanswered question, and even in the book they say that all this stuff is of an unknown origin, and they
Aha.
speak of over technology.
Right.
And I think that over technology is reference to some kind of alien technology in one of these animes. I can't remember the exact title,
Hmm.
but they did reuse a lot of these concepts in Xenosaga, but they refer to them as artifacts of God. And so, well, perhaps we shouldn't go into that, but
I mean,
Xenosaga was meant to be a kind of reimagining, going back to the first kind of to do it chronologically over with the first episode
okay.
instead of beginning at episode 5. But of course, there were some changes so
Mhm.
that you cannot really connect the two works in
Right.
the
They
in
don't
the in
perfectly fit together anymore.
no, no, not in the sense of being a story or the plot, but thematically they can actually be complement one another very, very, very well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would be, I think, interested after what you said to go back and look at Xenosaga more and see how it kind of reinterprets some of these ideas. But I mean, just for Xenogears to stick with that, um, the characters, Faye, Citan, then you meet Ellie, right, and Bart shortly after that. They seem to really be the sort of the core of the game. And there's other characters that fit a lot less snugly, let's say, like they don't fit as well. It seems like into the story. I mean, I'm thinking of especially like the Choo Choo character. Oh,
Yeah.
even
I
Rico
mean,
in a
the first
way.
time I played through this game, I don't remember if there was quite a character like that in. Well, there was this Kate Sit character in Final Fantasy VII,
Yeah,
but you know the closest analogy that I had for Choo Choo was something like the Ewoks in Star Wars for some
exactly.
reason.
Yeah, it's like there's these kind of random things, and even like the way that the game starts out in Lahan, you do have a character from Chrono Trigger who is present in the village
Yeah,
for no
yeah.
apparent reason. She's just there to sort of be a joke almost. It's very strange, like the way this game kind of got cobbled together. I feel like there's
Yeah,
so many
there is a
things.
shift in tone at times where it almost feels like you can tell that it had several different writers.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, and
absolutely.
I think that Takahashi, the creator,
Hmm.
he mentioned something about making a compromise because he wanted to please the developers who were more used to fantasy worlds.
Okay.
And so I think these things, when those children, for example, launch Billys Gear, you know, with this what's it called, a Sigsaw,
Yeah.
you know, and they, you know, that feels a bit, you know, Takahashi, at least when he back with Xenogears and Xenosaga, had this very sort of dark
Hmm.
atmosphere. So whenever there is this kind of dark, gloomy mood, I think he even described himself as a gloom and doom person
Yeah.
in one of these comments.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you get the feeling there is a kind of guiding vision that's behind everything, um, which is very
My first
grand.
impression, my first impression of the game, I remember that it felt very dark, especially after this encounter with Graf,
Oh yeah.
um, and also then there's this music. It's Id's theme.
Oh yes, yes. The Demon of Elru.
It was playing pretty early on when they were on this transport when Citan has this conversation with the Emperor.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
I
that's.
have a
Go ahead.
I had a very I remember that bit very strongly from my first playthrough. It was one of those things that stood out because that felt much darker than, for example, Final Fantasy or even Parasite Eve, which was a pretty dark game. You know, it was this horror game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something so unsettling about this character who's been your kind of guiding, you know, he's a doctor, right? He's been looking after you and sort of guiding you, and he's been supporting you after everything terrible has happened and your life has been turned upside down. He's been there for you, but then you see him in this kind of strange vision, a sequence talking to these these odd looking people in a place that's like some kind of nightmare landscape,
Yeah,
with little scenes that float around. Right? It's very surreal actually.
yeah,
Um,
surreal and almost abstract.
yeah, yeah. And that there's this kind of feeling, this ominous feeling that you can't trust anyone. You know, if you can't trust Doc, then you can't trust anyone. So,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. But I think I trusted him pretty well because I felt like I mean I didn't know who this emperor was,
uh,
but you know you know he had this kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi quality to him. You know this the wise older guide.
right.
But he's sort of he looks much younger than what is typical of that archetype. And
Yeah.
so he's still the kind of original. There's still something unique about him. You know,
I,
he's probably the most popular character. At least he used to be. You know,
uh-huh.
among
Yeah.
the fans.
Well, I mean, and then eventually he gets his sword back, and then it's like, oh, come
Yeah,
on, it's just broken. He's too powerful. He's too good. Um, Yeah, I always liked Faye and Ellie the best, I think. I liked Bart too. Like I like the way that Faye's friendship with Bart develops in the game, but the story between Faye and Ellie always felt the most interesting to me, I guess. Um, and it's sort of mature in a different sense. It's like, there's this kind of love story, which is not usually that developed in these games. But I felt like it really in terms of its psychological symbols that they use. You mentioned the kind of the archetype of the wise old man. Well, here we have sort of the self and the other, or even right the mother figure in some of Faye's dream sort of visions, or the anima is talked about there. There's this kind of whole Jungian side of it that's brought in as you
Yeah,
go through the
and
game.
also
Yeah.
Lacan. I don't know how you
Yes.
pronounce him. He also had this idea with the other and desire that had to do with this
Right.
Oedipus, Oedipus complex.
Right. The I pronounce that Oedipus. Not
Oedipus.
sure.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
usually
Uh,
from Freud, right?
yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not used to pronouncing these
No, it's
words.
totally fine. Yeah, like so there's a lot of this kind of psychological material along with the religious material that's woven into this ultimately like a very compelling and fun game. I think it still like works as a game, although at times it feels more like you're watching a movie or even reading a book than playing. But still, like there's something to that combination of all these different elements that for me it still works.
Yeah. There's something about it that's just crafted very well.
Yeah,
Especially if you play the game again and you
yeah,
sort of see all this foreshadowing and all the build up. You can look at this music box in Sitan's house.
yes.
It almost like it foreshadows the entire game.
I know. Yeah. I remember that very clearly and vividly when I first played the game before I knew what was going to happen. I still found that scene really powerful, but I agree that when you do have more of the whole story sort of at least in some sense in your mind, even if you don't understand everything about it, and then you go back and you play it again, you definitely get a lot more out of the experience. In that way, it's a lot like, a great book or a great film.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. That was how I felt
yeah,
the first time around. Like this is like a good book or something.
yeah,
Which also adds to this feeling that it is different from typical Japanese entertainment.
yes, yeah. And so just to the music box element, I I don't remember now exactly what the full story of that piece of machinery is, but when it opens, it looks a lot like the layout of Shevat, the other floating city, right? The one, not the one Satan is from, but the other floating city in the game. Is that where the music box comes from? Do you remember that part of it?
Um, yeah, well, my first or my impression of that foreshadowing has more to do with how the inside of this box looks like the Zohar, and then you had this female angel in front of it that
Yeah,
I sort of associate with Ellie.
totally. Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, because
But you are correct that this poem, this music box is the is based on in the in-game universe. It is based on a poem which was written, I think, after the war 500 years ago, and the statue is also meant to be a statue of Sophia
okay.
after she had sacrificed herself, because that statue is on Shevat or Shevat.
Right, right. This
Uh,
huge guardian angel statue. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Because some people have speculated that this music box was made by Kim, and he was going to give it to Emeralda after she was going to
Ah,
be born. And the reason why they believe this is because if you go back to Sitan's house, I think it is on this disc 2,
uh-huh.
and check this music box again. It says to celebrate the birth of my daughter or something like that.
Oh,
But
okay.
I think that's meant to be that's Citan's own writing, and that he is referring to his own daughter Midori.
Oh,
Because it seems kind of strange that would come from Cebuin.
yeah, right. The sort
Because
of something.
this angel that is sort of attached to the music box comes from 500 years ago, so it's kind of it's too far back, I think.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, thinking about the different ways to interpret that as a gift, either from Faye, aka Kim, to his daughter, or from Satan to his daughter, there's I think, an interesting way that giving of gifts plays in as a motif in lots of ways. Like even with Graf, in a strange way, he's always trying to give people, the to like release their full power, right? He's always trying to give give them opportunities to sort of realize that destructive potential. So it's like a weird negative form of a gift, but it's still within that realm. I find that to be a really uh, interesting element of this game. There's other kinds of gifts which are again sort of like negative. Like Satan is always bringing this gear to Faye. He doesn't want the gear, but he keeps having to use it, right? So it's necessary. He has to accept this. It's like fate. Um, but I think about that too in terms of the creators. They're a team, right? They're a husband and wife team, and so the game in a way is their gift. It's like their child almost. It's like one way to think about it.
Yeah,
Um,
I haven't thought about it that way,
hmm.
but perhaps you.
Well, yeah, I see. I would be really interested, I guess, to understand more about where the different writers sort of had their influence on the script, and like it seems like the man in the bar who has the mermaid's tear, he had to be put there um, by somebody who had the kind of the whole picture of the game in their mind. But Luca, right, the creator, inventor girl from Chrono Trigger, she had to be put there by somebody who didn't really have that much concern for the whole picture, or like you said, maybe it's kind of a compromise. Um, but it must have been such an interesting process, them, writing the story sort of collaboratively in that way, and sort of weaving all of these pieces of the story together. It's really remarkable. Um, that that thing you mentioned about Emeralda made me think of the drunk guy in the bar who gives you the mermaid's tear.
Yeah,
There's all these little sort of hidden. Um, they don't make sense when you first come across them, right? But then when you come back and play it again, you can sort of see how they work together. Um, I wanted to ask too about just thinking about like influences and history and things like that. So you did mention Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, and Star Wars has come up a few times in our conversation in different ways as two big influences so far. Obviously, there's all of this sort of mysticism and esoteric religious material and all the psychological material. Are there other big influences that we have left out so far that you can think of? Other
well, I
important
don't know, but
sources?
there's one thing that I always found a bit curious, and
Okay.
I always wondered if Takashi may have been influenced by some of these fringe ideas about what's its name, Eric von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods. This idea that the aliens that people in the past have been visited by aliens,
Ah,
because there is, if you look at the Eldridge, the ship in the beginning,
yes.
I guess you don't see the whole ship in the game so well, but in the book, you can see that it sort of looks like one of the Nazca line drawings. You know, this that some have speculated are, made to signal to aliens.
So in Peru, these lines you can only see from the sky, right? If you're
Yeah,
flying above. Yeah. The Nazca
and
lines. Yeah.
and there's one that's called the hummingbird that looks a lot like the Eldridge.
Ah, that's so cool.
And also there's also this one character, this one kid, I think it is, in Billy's orphanage that says something about Henry Mingas, who got abducted by aliens or something like that. I also thought that was a strange thing to just add into the game.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like the kind of thing that would be right up Takahashi and Sarai Saga's alley. That seems like the kind of thing they'd be interested in.
And of
Uh,
course, inside the game, there is this sort of plot where people on the surface are abducted by Solaris.
yes, right. Which is another movie title.
Yeah, yeah,
Solaris.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Uh, and of course, Soylent Green is brought in like a very obvious way. They call it the Soylent system, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many weird little references. The but the I think the beginning of the game, to go back to that again, that script that runs across the screen at the very start of the sequence is the thing about alpha and omega. We're never really told who is saying that, but it sounds like that's part of the kind of program for the Deus system that sort of gets split into Miang and Ellie later
Yeah,
on.
well, I always interpreted that line as coming from the wave existence,
See,
because
that makes more sense to me. Yeah, yeah.
the wave existence mentions that it is alpha and omega. I think when Faye,
Ah,
I think so. I don't remember the script at the moment, but
see,
but
that makes
that first line is more like an epigraph. It's not really a quote in the game. It is.
right.
Yeah, a lot of stories open with an epigraph.
Yeah, see, that works for me. And that makes me think, like you described, then the actual takeover of the ship is happening in a kind of fall from paradise, right? The fall of mankind sort of way, that they're
Yeah,
they're they're being thrust out of contact with some kind of higher being or something like that. And
and then
instead
you have
subject.
the mother as Eve at the end, sort of staring at the ocean, like the first woman of this new world, or the
Yes,
or
right.
the lower world, and the sort of like the material world.
Yes. And so they're subject to a demiurge that's not the true, right, higher power, but something in
Right.
between. Yeah, that makes me really wonder, I guess, about the alpha and omega language that's used there. It's almost like this game is interested in getting people who play it to go and like read like actually go and study some of this material, like look up, what is the Zohar. Okay, I'm gonna actually like read about that. But even like to read the Bible, or to read at least some kind of history of religion, or philosophy or something like that. Have you found like that people who use your site and are curious about this stuff, does it seem like they really go and read more about this stuff? Do they tend to come at it from either a religious standpoint or a philosophical standpoint?
I'm not sure I've had that much contact with people who have read the site,
Yeah.
uh, but well, there's been some who has been into these sort of things, but I think a lot of people sort of just I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I know I hardly ever hear from people who actually, read stuff that I post online or anything like that. So I feel that, but when I do, people who do take the time to get in touch, um, do seem to be really, thoughtful and interested in learning more about video game sources, like the influences on these games. I think just for me, it's like a very interesting area that's just starting to kind of open up, is like taking the game more seriously in that way and studying it within that context of other books, films, etc. But even
Yeah,
like,
yeah. What's so fascinating to me about Takahashi is that he does seem to have gone through all of these sometimes very obscure sources.
right?
I mean, I have tried reading this so hard. I can't make any sense of it.
Wow. Yeah, I have never tried, so I haven't got there yet. But I don't know. Like I've tried reading some. I read Childhood's End as a result of playing this game and enjoyed it. Um, it it made me want to read Carl Jung, who I've never really tried reading before, which is
Yeah. I mean,
really interesting.
there are a lot of influences that I too haven't had time to check up on yet because there's just so much.
Yeah, it's like a complete, um, you know, parallel education, that opens up when you start looking at this. Like it makes me think, like to really study this stuff, you would have to study a lot of other languages too, right? You'd have to learn at least Japanese to know the script, for
Yeah.
yourself, and but it's so difficult. So it's good to have a community of people to do this with.
And there
I
is a lot of translation errors. Already in the opening movie, there's this line, damn, so they're planning on attacking or something like that.
Right.
And it's not supposed to be they, it's supposed to be it or something like that because
Yeah.
the translator for that part had to do that blind. He had no idea what happened later in the series. There was another podcast with the translator, Richard Honeywood,
Yeah.
where he talked about this.
Right. Yeah. So that they, you hear one line out of context, you can't even get the basic translation of it. Like that just shows, I think, how important context is in a very sort
Yeah.
of abstract sense. Um, yeah, but I mean, to uh, to have other people to talk to about it with, and other people who know about certain aspects of it, to sort of have this give and take, I think is really, it's just a really cool thing. Like I don't know um, how how much this game will continue to be played by newcomers, but I think having some of this kind of resource out there for them is really, really beneficial. Could really be an interesting thing for people to study and to learn from. So
Yeah, there isn't a lot of website devoted to these games, especially not Xenosaga.
yeah,
That series almost that went into obscurity pretty fast.
yeah. Well, like I said, I'll have to keep going through Xenogears first, but then I will eventually get to Xenosaga and try that again. And again, thank you so much, AC, for all your work on this and for taking the time to talk to me a little bit here. Um, I would love to talk to you again as I get further into the game if you have some time.
Yeah, I think we
Excellent.
can do that again. I think I have a lot more to say.
Yes, by all means. Then I'll let you go for now, and we'll continue the conversation another time. All
Yeah.
right. Cool. Thanks.